Right, I think that clock has stopped. So it's 7 o'clock according to my watch. We all seem to be present except apologies from...
That's just what we sorry, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Taylor. Right, so apologies accepted. Minutes for the last meeting are on page 5 through to page 15. Hope you've all read them with intent. First of all, are they a correct record of the meeting? Yeah. Okay. And are there any matters arising within those minutes? I'll take it.
Don't pause for too long, Chair.
No? Very good. Right, they're accepted then.
I just thought of that.
Yeah, he just thought for a moment. Right, I've got no urgent items this evening. Just for the matter of the tape, this obviously is being recorded. It will be on the internet at some stage for the members of the public who obviously want to keep up to touch with what's happening in the housing scrutiny every quarter. Declarations of interest. Okay. Right.
There's no formal declaration, but can I just introduce...
Yes, I was going to do that. Yes, I was going to do that. Yes, our new head of housing, John Knight, has joined us. He replaces the interims and Richard. You know, that's it. Two Richards, there we are. So we wish him well, and I'm sure everyone will get to know him in due course. Very good. Okay. So we move on to item 5, which is the sheltered housing changes to service. Sue, if you could give us an update through the paper, that'd be good.
Yes, the sheltered housing service, we did a consultation back in 2013-14. The service changed in February 2015. We went from 30 complexes and officers down to 16 officers, covering different sites, moving around the borough. We currently have 1,283 units, as I say, 30 sites, and as of November 28th, 1,261 tenancies were active and gave us a void level of 22, which is 1.7. That's quite good, actually. That probably falls in line with the fact that we don't have any hard lets anymore, and that also that Sheltered Housing Service have taken over the tenancy management. So we actually do the whole remit. We do sign-ups and we manage the voids. So we're managing them quite well. And the feedback from customer surveys, the 80% of tenants think that the estates officer service being provided by Sheltered Housing is a good service. And that was out of 489 tenants, 35% scored it as excellent service. We've also got a number of antisocial behaviour issues with this current age group, which tends to be alcohol, drug related. We only have 3 recorded open cases at the moment, and the fact that the sheltered housing officers manage the estate management side of it means that they are on the ground and deal with it a lot quicker than it would normally happen, because we would normally go to general needs and ask them to be involved. Now we deal directly with the antisocial behaviour team, so there's a quicker response time. The sheltered housing, 54% of tenants living in sheltered are eligible for benefit, with 5% requiring a high level of support. We do 430 daily contacts. They are where we contact people to check that they're fine, that they're okay, if they need any support. This is approximately 14.5% per complex, which is quite good really, and it's encouraging because we're trying to increase the number of people that are independent living rather than reliant on something from us on a daily basis. It also came out from surveys that people were aware of the repairs contract number, which before we used to do all of the reporting for tenants, which again slowed things up for them, and now it's empowered them a bit. If somebody's got an issue, we would pick that up for them. If they've got hearing or disabilities of any kind, we would pick that up for them. What we did pick up halfway through the change of officers was that tenants were a bit disappointed that there wasn't a member of staff on site all the time. So what we did was we re-evaluated what we were doing. We had one officer covering 3 sites, and we listened to the tenants. We went to residents' meetings, and I decided with management that we needed to increase the number of officers so that they went down to 2 sites each rather than covering 3, and that seems to be working a lot better. The sheltered housing tenants seem to be a lot happier with that, and it seems to be working. So we've now got 18 officers, and we've split it into 3 teams with 3 team leaders, and it seems to be working a lot better since we've put the new system in place of extra officers.
Are there any questions on the report? Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sue, for your report. I'm just wondering about the void level, and you said it's not bad. I'm just wondering if there's any kind of benchmarking figure that we've got to we could have to go alongside that 1.7%, and also what what is the definition of a short-term void and a long-term void? Okay,
I don't have any benchmarking at the moment, but I can get that for you. The short-term voids are ones that are turned around over a short period of time, so within about, am I right in saying 11 days?
At the high end, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Less than that.
Less than that. But because obviously I don't know if you know, but we all now do tenancy audits of the properties. So when we do our support planning with our tenants, we go in and audit the property as well to ensure that they've got everything that they need, that the housing accommodation is suitable, that they've got hot water, etc., etc. So that means that when we take the properties back, they are in good condition, because if we do an audit and we highlight that there's a problem with the property, we would pick that up at that audit. And we do ours in sheltered annually. In general needs, it's 3 years. Does that help?
So a long-term void would be sort of anything over 10 days, or is there a sort of specific thing that makes it a long-term void?
Yeah. Is this one? A long-term void is normally one that requires some capital works as opposed to the routine resurfacing. So it's the nature of the works, the scale of the works that determines it as long-term. Inevitably, it will usually take longer, but the term itself means that it needs some capital works, not just routine resurfacing.
I think for me, historically, when I first took over the service fully 2 years ago, we did have a lot of properties that we considered long-term voids because we couldn't fill them, because we didn't have clients going in. But because we're actively working on independent living and identifying clients, etc., and promoting the service, we've found that we don't have any issues with actually letting the property.
And I understand now you have a waiting list.
Actually, I think we do, yes. There are people waiting to come into sheltered now.
I've nearly been round to all of the sheltered. I've been pestering Sue, and I think I've got about 3 more in Grays to visit. I must admit, I've been very, very impressed with both the quality of the stock in some areas, but also the community spirit that exists in most of them. Obviously, there were some properties that we've had to decommission over the last couple of years, and that was a report that came back to the last meeting. But I think, you know, it's something that Thurrock should be really proud of in terms of their sheltered accommodation, with the quality of the stock, the community spirit, and the sense of activities and pride that goes on is admirable.
Yes.
Well, under having been a member, I think Joy would understand this as well. From 79 onwards, we were not allowed to touch the capital receipts. So the council at the time, they decided to build sheltered accommodation units. That's why we got so many centres.
I did notice that when going round, the number of plaques that were from the 1980s.
Can I just say about the community, just as a highlighter, the Macmillan Cancer Coffee Mornings that went on across the country, Sheltered Housing did a competition where all the sites actually did fundraising, and we raised over £6,000 on coffee mornings from just Sheltered alone.
Yes.
Do you highlight that?
I did try to, but I promoted it to the obviously to the complexes because they all got involved, but because I mentioned it to comms after the event, they said it was too late because it was old news. What I'm going to do is, what we did was we gave a competition, as I say, for the complex that raised the most money, and that was Hearty Close. And they have got, it's free. One of my officers who's now left, she's coming in with her husband to do a sing-along. So we're going to do tea and cakes and a sing-along, and I will then promote that then, because it won't be old news, it will be new news because of the competition side and the fact that we can then promote the fact that we raised that amount of money.
I don't think that's true that it's old news, because it's people raise money all year round. So I think that's something that should be highlighted and tell comms this is what you want done, you know, because it's something that should get out there. Yeah. You know, it should be telling people what good things they do in the community. So I'd, push that one.
I'm sure Roger could have a word with comms. Yes, I'm sure. Or he could have a word. Right. With that, we're asked to note the report. Is that noted? Yes, good. Then we move on to the update on the HMO licence fee consultation. So you're taking that? Yes, good.
Thank you, Chair. I will assume members have read the report, therefore I'll just highlight the key points within the report for your consideration. Back on 21st of July 2016, this panel agreed to review the proposed 5-year HMO licence fee based on the extension of mandatory HMO licensing as a statutory requirement. In the report, it highlights the landlord or resident consultation feedback about the proposed fees and how the private sector housing team can support private landlords with landlord accreditation. In addition, it sets out the proposal to carry out an assessment of additional HMO licensing under Part 2 of the Housing Act 2004 to better regulate the HMO housing market. Under the Housing Act 2004, it also gives the local authority general approval to declare an additional licence scheme within its area, subject to the council consulting with persons that are likely to be affected by this scheme over a 10-week period. So in essentially that means is looking at areas where there's a high concentration of HMO homes in Thurrock. The recommendations in the report are to note the central government changes to mandatory licensing, which have been announced now, to note the feedback in the public consultation, thirdly to note the proposed licence fee for 2017 and 18, and fourthly to note the proposal to test the appropriateness of additional licensing powers in Thurrock. Under the introduction and background, 2.2, the government has announced its decision to extend mandatory HMO licensing, and this includes removing the the story rule, so that all houses, regardless of the number of floors, with 5 or more people from 2 or more households are in scope of mandatory licensing. It will also extend mandatory licence to flats above and below businesses' premises, and that's the definition of that is 3 or more flats. Sorry, 3 or less than 3 flats in a building. So it doesn't target new modern developments where you have more than 3 flats in those blocks. In Thurrock, we're aware of over 300 HMOs that meet the new mandatory HMO definition, and this is a significant licensing increase for the private sector housing team to administer, which will have staffing implications to deliver this scheme. As explained before, the council can determine its own licence fee for HMO licence applications to carry out this function, and in terms of coming to our new proposed HMO licence fees, we have used the HMO licence fee calculator to set the new fees in 2017-18. The scheme of additional licensing allows the council to impose a licence on other HMO category types which are not subject to the mandatory licensing definition. This test will enable us to see if there is significant problems of ASB, poor management and maintenance in those properties which are spread across Thurrock, and the aim is to report back our findings to this panel. In terms of consultation, when carrying out this piece of work, we did a broad range of consultation for persons that have been affected by the proposed HMO licence fees. 67% of 166 residents were supportive of extending HMO licensing, and out of the 108 persons landlords who completed our survey, 76% felt that HMO licensing improved their property management standards. Under 3.5, our partners, Essex Police and the Essex Fire Brigade, are strong support of mandatory licensing as well as additional licensing of HMOs. The plan will be to, based on the feedback that we got from the Landlord Forum and the online survey, is to carry out an awareness campaign leading up to the HMO mandatory scheme, as 74% of landlords had not heard about the government changes. Landlords with more than one HMO welcomed the cap discount we were offering and the early bird discount scheme. In terms of benefits of the landlord accreditation scheme, we are promoting it pays to be accredited, as it helps the landlords to meet the required lawful standards. This supplies the private housing market with safe and suitable homes for Thurrock residents. In terms of the licence fee in Appendix 1, this will be a 5-year licence fee, and the sums are comparable to other local authorities that we've tested against. Accredited landlords will receive a 15% discount on their HMO licence fee, and landlords with more than one property will also benefit from a 20% cap per property. A 12-month licence fee will be granted only in the circumstances where a landlord fails to pass their management and maintenance inspection that we carry out. This period will allow us to improve with them to their management and maintenance of their home, as well as for them to trade lawfully whilst evidencing they can achieve full compliance of our management licence conditions. Under point 6 consultation, the private sector housing team will test additional licensing under Part 2 of the Housing Act 2004 in order to gather evidence of poor management and maintenance standards in areas of high HMO concentration. Like I said at the beginning, we will report back those findings to this panel. In terms of impact on the community, we see HMO licensing should improve the health and well-being of private landlords through the reduction of poor and unsafe housing conditions. The licence fees are transparent and are reviewed every year, and there will be staffing implications which will be anticipated to be cost neutral to the council, as the licence fee income will pay for the additional staff required to administer the scheme. We under diversity 8.3, we envisage there's no negative equality implications. What we do foresee is positive measures that are expected through the improvement of housing conditions in Thurrock.
Well, I think the report is welcomed, and the licence fee will make sure that conditions are more acceptable and controlled, which is important. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Thanks, Chair. The temporary 12-month licence fee. Why are we giving them 12 months when they haven't done anything anyway? Because we're obviously looking at them to start with. We're giving them another year to make it as it should be, the maintenance and management of the property they hold. So I can't understand why we're giving them a whole year when they haven't done it anyway.
I've benchmarked with other authorities that do HMO licensing, and two things. One, what we want to do is work with private landlords and not to sanction them. And two, the 12-month licence allows the landlord to improve their management standards over that period. What the guidance is regarding licence fees, that it's recommended that you do 12 months, not something shorter like 6 months.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask about, because I think I'm being daft, I'll admit, and I think I'm misreading this, but I'm slightly confused about 2.7 with the Housing Act allowing the local authority to impose a licence on other categories of HMOs. What would another category of HMO be?
The other HMO categories would be ones which fall below the HMO mandatory definition. So it would basically capture those which are 3 to 5 people living in a shared house.
Thank you, that clarifies that.
Item 7, which is the HRA business plan and the budget, 17-18.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm going to just sort of set some of the context for this, and then Julie Curtis from Finance is going to take us through the detail. Just explain why we brought this to Scrutiny Committee tonight. This is a paper that will be a report that will be going to Cabinet in February as part of our recasting and resetting the HRA business case. A number of reasons why we've had to do that. First of all, members will be aware that we are required to reduce the rents by 1% a year for the rest of this Parliament. The original HRA business case had been set on the basis of a 2.5% increase in the rents, so we've had to reassess the affordability of the schemes that we had previously in the HRA. We're also mindful of a number of further government initiatives at the moment, some of which are not yet fully clear. We're aware that the pay to stay announcement has now been withdrawn as a mandatory requirement, but there's still some uncertainty over issues such as the high value voids levy and also around fixed term tenancies. So we've had to make some assumptions about those in the plan here tonight. We've also had to review service charges, and there are some recommendations here tonight for members to consider before this goes to Cabinet for final agreement in February. So this is there's a lot of detail in here, and I think it might be worth Julie sort of taking us through quite carefully, because I think there may well be points that you want to stop and ask questions as we go along. So I'll hand over to Julie.
Okay. This also to further add and put some context to what Roger's just said. This is the current position, and over the next few weeks, some of the assumptions in here will be refined. We're waiting for the government's white paper on housing, which may influence some of the assumptions and the things that we take forward. So at the moment, this is the current position, and based on the progress that we've been making over the last couple of months. The HRA needs to be financially viable moving forwards, and we also need to be able to deliver the Council's housing priorities from within our HRA, and this is what we've attempted to capture in this paper. And as I said, the white paper will allow us to further refine what the assumptions that we've already made. The key thing here is the reminder about the government's policy on social rent reduction and how that will continue to take resources out of the HRA. So what we've looked at, alongside continuing to deliver the Council's housing priorities, is other ways of generating additional resources and making sure that tenants are correctly contributing for the services that they directly receive. Also, to make you aware, alongside the development of the business plan and the budgets, there is a review of the housing service that has been undertaken, and this review will identify areas where efficiencies and improvements can be further made, and allow us to further invest back in the service. There are a number of points for noting at the front of the paper that were covered in the text. The main thing is to note the assumptions that we've currently made, to note that we're waiting for the white paper to be published. To also note, which I'll talk about in more detail, about how we're going to fund part of our new build programme. Also to note that we are proposing some growth in our revenue repairs. The new capital investment proposals are noted. That tenants be charged service charges for services that they are currently receiving, which in some cases are only leveraged on leaseholders, and that we introduce an inclusive sheltered support charge. And also to note what I've already said about the service review. Now, what the HRA business plan does is it sets out in a kind of a financial way how the council will deliver all aspects of the services that it delivers through the HRA, and that's for both capital and revenue purposes. So what it does is it looks at all our commitments, it makes some assumptions, and then it kind of looks at the risks associated with those. We start off with the business plan by looking at the current year's budget, so the 16-17 budget that was agreed by Cabinet back in February of this year is used as the base. But we also are mindful of any risks or opportunities that exist within the current financial year, which may alter or influence that base position that we take forward. Okay, in terms of what we've included around inflation on the existing budgets, we've included 1% for salaries, 1.5% repairs, and that's linked to the contracts that we have and the contractual uplifts that are within those. But more importantly, we've not assumed any inflation on other costs across the life of the business plan. So what we're saying is we will manage within the existing budgets and we won't assume any inflation on those. Okay. Rents, in line with the government's current policy, we've included the 1% reduction applied to all rents for 17-18 and the following 2 years. And the business plan at the moment includes a 1% increase thereafter. We've erred on the side of caution a little. As Roger said at the start of the introduction of this report, the original business plan included a larger rent rise assumption. But given that we don't know what will happen, we've been slightly prudent and just put in 1%. Affordable rents that are charged charged on our new build properties are charged and capped at 70% of market value, and that's inclusive of service charges. And this was agreed by Cabinet in December 2015. Okay, and any new lettings post-April 2016 are limited to local housing allowance levels. Okay, now to talk a little bit more about service charges. What we've looked at is the current charges that are the services that are provided to leaseholders and tenants, and we've also looked at those which are only leaseholders are only paying, which potentially we feel that tenants should be contributing towards the cost of as well. We've also looked at what we've done as well as looked at other local authorities in the immediate vicinity to see what they charge their tenants for. At the moment, at Thurrock, we charge tenants for 2 different service charges, and that's caretaking and concierge. Most local authorities charge for a different range of services. They're not all the same, but generally they are directly linked to the costs, and leaseholders would contribute to that as well. So the table there sets out what other local authorities charge for, and as you can see, there's no real definitive list here. By levying a charge on tenants to recover for the costs that they directly receive, we potentially could bring additional resources of £2 million into the HRA in a financial year. Now, we've considered the options of how we might go about introducing these service charges. The option 1 is to continue with the current arrangements and not charge tenants directly for these services that they receive. The second option is to introduce it all in one go. Okay, that's the cost as from 1st of April, that's what you're going to pay for. Or option 3 is to introduce service charges on a phased basis. And this allows us to kind of ease the charge in, and also ensure that we're able to obviously link that directly to the services they've received. Now, we've looked at the current heads of charge that we think we should be charging to tenants at the moment, and what we're suggesting is that we introduce service charges for lift maintenance, door entry, communal electricity and grounds maintenance. And as you can see, in 2015-16, the cost of providing those services was just over £2 million, and we were only getting just over £60,000 worth of contributions towards those costs from leaseholders. The residual amount is the amount of those costs which tenants are receiving services to that value but not contributing towards them. Now, all those service charges that we're proposing are eligible for the housing element of universal credit, and as I say, other local authorities charge for them, maybe not all of them, and maybe a different sort of version of that, but they all are generally charged for by some local authority. So what we're suggesting is that we phase them in, but we're on grounds maintenance. What we do as well is have an interim charge. At the moment, we are working with our colleagues in environmental services to get a more detailed profile of how that service is delivered and the spend profile to accurately charge people. So for environmental services, we're proposing to implement a reduced charge of £5 from 17/18, while we continue to work with colleagues and do a review of how that service is delivered. For the other service charges, we tend to phase them in over 3 years. So the first year it would be a third, if you like, of the total charge that would mean we would fully recover the costs. In the second year, 2/3. And by year 3, we would be recovering all the costs for lift maintenance, door entry and communal electricity. Grounds maintenance, once we've completed that piece of work, we will bring proposals forward about how we implement that probably over the same period of time. We've done some initial work, and again, this isn't 100% accurate because it's based on the data set we currently have. And the number of tenants will be affected. Out of our total just under 10,000 tenants, we anticipate just over 3,200 will be affected by the introduction of the first three, either lift maintenance, door entry, communal electricity, in year one, with majority of those tenants paying for 2 out of the 3 services proposed. And of those 3,200 tenants, 58% of them are on full or partial housing benefit. Sorry, I've lost my place. As I mentioned as well. Sorry, there's actually an error in this report. The maximum charge, if anyone was going to pay in year one all of those charges, you can see from the table that the maximum charge they would pay is £7.79 per week. But we don't envisage that there are going to be that many tenants that would pay for all 4. Some would pay for 3, some for 2. Now, the 1% rent reduction that all tenants will receive will obviously slightly offset the impact of any service charge introduction. The overall reduction on average will be 86p per tenant in 17-18, and that will partially offset that. Now, in terms of consultation over this introduction, it's proposed that in advance of the Cabinet meeting in February that we will write to every tenant to inform them of what we're going to do and how that links into the services that they receive. Okay. Right, do you want to move on, or do you want me to answer questions on that section? Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, in some of the high rises and 2-storey flats, we've got people who own their own flat who are already paying a charge for looking after gardens or whatever. What happens to them? Does that stay at the same, or does that slightly go up?
The leasehold charges will continue to be calculated in the way that they are now, but we will work more closely to link them into what tenants pay and make sure that it's fair and the charges are in line with each other.
Thank you, Chair. Do we feel that in a context of stagnating wages, inflation running at a 2-year high, that this is the most progressive way we could be going about this? I know that the word fair is used a heck of a lot in this section of the report. However, this version of fair is it's kind of like the poll tax version of fair, because everybody, regardless of their situation, has to pay it. I know I certainly have tenants who would feel that they can't face an increase, they can't face a rise, and to be penalised for living in a tower block, I think they would find incredibly unfair in actual fact. Do we think this is really the right time for this? And secondly, I'm slightly confused about the figures. I have to admit, I feel that this was a slightly confusing sort of mega paragraph in here about this. What would be the maximum tenants would be paying at the end of the 3 years per week? And then my other question is, has there been a calculation as to how this would impact how it would interact in terms of the benefit cap? Because the last thing we want to do is to push people into homelessness through trying to top up our own reserves, our own revenue streams.
Can I deal with the first one? We as officers have a charge, I suppose, to present options to you as members, and we have a situation where the HRA is facing a potential deficit, and in fact actually it isn't fully balanced, as you'll see in the appendix at the end. We also do not have any money to develop new capital schemes beyond the existing 3 schemes that are scheduled to take place in the next couple of years. So at the end of the day, it will be a member decision as to whether we introduce this charge or not. I think what we're trying to do is demonstrate that this is consistent with what other boroughs are doing. we are suggesting that it be phased in over a period of time and not be introduced in one hit. And also, we will do, as we do with our financial inclusion officers, we will make sure that everyone is getting their maximum benefits, that there will be a majority of people will notice fairly small impacts. There will be a group who are just above the benefit level. Always tends to be the group that are most hardest hit, and we need to think about that group who are, I say, not in housing benefit but just on a low income, and that is, you're correct, that is the group that will most probably feel this most of all. But I say we are obviously having to present you with some options as to how we can make the HRA balance at the end of the day. And there was a specific question about the figures.
I don't think I can answer, because of the work that we need to do around grounds maintenance, I don't think I can give you a definitive answer on what the maximum is that someone would end up paying at the end of the 3 years. The three charges, other than grounds maintenance, the maximum, if you took those three together, would basically be 3 times £2.79. But we don't know at the moment what the grounds maintenance figures are going to turn out like, because the £5 is very much an interim charge to recover some of the costs whilst we continue to work with colleagues in environmental services. So I wouldn't want to give an answer now and say something which doesn't end up being the true figure.
And sorry, the benefit cap question. Sorry.
We are, over the coming 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to be doing some detailed work around grounds maintenance and all the service charges. And looking at who would be, which tenants would be eligible to pay those, and then working with our colleagues in the rent team to look at who potentially would be affected.
Is it okay for me to come back? I find that quite difficult because I feel that without the grounds maintenance charge in there, I feel like to agree this option, we would be kind of writing a blank cheque, and I don't think that's something that I'm particularly comfortable with. The other thing I'm not comfortable with is the benefit cap issue. I mean, I don't know. I haven't done the sums. I don't know if it will be an issue, but I would really like to know if it would be an issue, because that's the last thing in the world we need to be happening.
Know the overall numbers. We know that there's around about between 400 and 450 people that are going to be affected when the benefit cap comes down to 20,000. Approximately 200 of those are in council property. So the maximum number of people that will be affected will be around 200. Some of those would still be, obviously, the benefit cap wouldn't affect those, but we would have to work with those to identify if there are any particular people who would be put into hardship, because as you say, we would not want to make anyone homeless as a result of that and then have to then potentially pick up further costs. But we know the overall figures. There's around 400, 450, half are in private rented and half are in council property.
Are there any benefits to the tenants charging, or is it just purely to fetch up the revenue account?
The benefits are that those tenants who directly receive a service would be paying for the services that they receive, and rather than those costs being borne across all tenants who don't receive them. So that whilst you say, is there a benefit, it's more about people fairly paying for the services they're receiving, in line with what most other local authorities already do.
The tenants now complain about the door systems and everything like that don't work now, and they're waiting for it. If they start paying for it, are they going to get a better service?
That's a very good point, and I know some areas where people with grounds maintenance, I know some of the leaseholders have raised with us that actually they're paying a charge and they don't feel that they're getting the service. So we need to make sure that, in terms of our accountability, which is why we're having these discussions with environmental services, we want to be absolutely clear, what service are we getting in terms of grounds maintenance and grass cutting and all of that should be happening on council estates before we agree what that figure should be, that we want to be absolutely explicitly clear what the service level agreement should be, which is why at the moment we can only put an interim charge. I hope that this would make people more accountable. They should be accountable anyway, but they make them even more accountable. I think that I think the service in some areas is not as good as it should be. Particularly, you mentioned about the lifts, the doors, and the lifts. Those are two areas where I think there needs to be considerable improvement.
Yeah.
Would they be charged responsive repair costs? Would they be charged for that? So, say somebody does damage to the door through antisocial behaviour, and obviously the door's got to be mended. Would they have repair costs?
That wouldn't be dealt with through the service charges that we're proposing. That would be dealt with through a rechargeable repair to that individual tenant on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, that's not as part of this. That is another process in which that tenant would be.
So why do leaseholders have responsive repair costs?
The responsive repair costs in leaseholder service charges has generally been where a number of costs have been lumped in the past. What we've been doing now when we've been looking at heads of charge for leaseholders is splitting that out. And you will see in the bills that have gone out recently that amount for responsive repairs is a lot less because we split that out, and you now see like lift maintenance and the other elements that were included in that split out more specifically. So at the moment there isn't a proposal to charge tenants for responsive repairs because leaseholder service charges are dealt with on a slightly different basis, but their bills will specifically split out things that you will see that tenants are going to be asked to contribute to as well.
Okay.
One of the things I'm very concerned on is on page 35. Which is the sheltered service charges. Yeah. Well, I think it's important that people understand that. At the moment, we charge new tenants £8 a week. We're then proposing to charge everyone £15 a week. To me, it's unacceptable because, one, if you look at it, these tenants, some of them have limited incomes just above the thresholds where they would be able to claim, so they'd be lumbered with a £15 a week charge, and it seems a bit rich. I mean, I would be keen really to say, Roger, until you come back and give us all the detail, and you can come back and give it to us in February, I would say that we just hold this report in abeyance until such time you give us everything, and go back and have a look at this one as well, because I don't think the members would be too happy going round explaining to elderly tenants that suddenly they're going to be paying £15 a week. I think that would be totally unacceptable. We've always had fairness, and it's the way the HRA account has worked is that we put it across the whole tenancy. Now, I don't see why we should change that. I definitely don't think we should be introducing a £15 a week charge for elderly tenants when, one, the government are talking about getting rid of the triple lock, so their incomes are going down. Two, interest rates have been at a record low, so they haven't been able to get any income out of their money. There's lots, those are genuine reasons. Yes, we do have some, in inverted commas, some wealthy pensioners, but by and large they are few and far between. And I would be very concerned suddenly, £15 a week, that's a lot of money. When we're talking about, on page 33, and you talk about, you have got the ground maintenance charge, but you assume a figure of £5, and then you assume that this would be just under £8 a week. I would recommend to the committee that you go away, you bring us all the things back, and go away and look at this elderly person's charge, because I think that would not be acceptable. Are members generally in agreement with that?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think the £8 to new sheltered housing, we're saying where they've got, it's new, brand new, is that what we're talking about?
They're for
£8?
new tenants. So tenants signing up a tenancy to a sheltered dwelling for the first time would pay the £8.
Yeah, at the moment, it's new.
That's the existing arrangement.
Yeah.
So when this came back to members 18 months ago, 2 years ago,
that's right. We said at the time,
the decision at the time was,
and I can remember being in the chair and ruling and moving that we only give it to the new people signing a contract. Now we're talking about £15 a week. I think we need to go away and look at that. I don't think that's acceptable, honestly, and I don't think people here would find it, because these are the people at the sharp end of stuff, you know. Yeah, we need the money, but I'm sure we can look for other ways. I don't think we should bleed pensioners. I can see the headlines now. You know.
Or we hadn't moved on to that section, but so I don't know if you want Julie just to say.
Well, I think we should just kick this item into touch. You go away, give us the real figures in February, and then we'll come back and have a proper discussion. But please go away and think about that £15 a week. I think that's totally unacceptable, particularly the steer that the committee gave you 18 months ago. Is that agreed? Right, on to the next item. Which is the Council Spending Review update, if someone could introduce that, Roger.
Yep, this is actually going to be a fairly brief item because the actual housing, the bulk of the housing is actually covered in the HRA. So this is a report that's going to all scrutiny committees. It's largely focusing on the general fund. It shows the deficit that the council faces over the next 3 years, which was the budget gap from 17-18 to 2019-20 was just over 18 million. We've set up a series of programme boards that are working on looking at commercial opportunities, looking at ICT digital opportunities, procurement, reviewing of assets, and we have got that deficit down to pretty much near to zero. However, there are a number of assumptions built into that budget for next year, one of which is the increase in the council tax of 1.99% for the general council tax, and the increase of the council tax of what's called the adult social care precept of 2%. So that's part of the, if you like, the overall assumptions that are built into that. There's still a little bit of further work that we need to do to, if you like, get a full budget proposal to Cabinet. Again, this is going to Cabinet in February, but most of this doesn't actually directly affect the housing, the areas of responsibility for this scrutiny committee, because only a very small amount of housing is funded through the general fund. The only amounts that are funded through the general fund is the private sector work, and that's largely a report we talked about earlier in terms of HMO licensing and the homelessness budget, and there's no proposal to reduce either of those. In fact, the private sector work is mostly going to be increasing because of the increased responsibilities we have around licensing. So it's a general report that's going to all scrutiny committees, but because this committee is largely dealing with HRA related items, it only has a very minimal impact. I don't know if Julie wants to add anything else from finance?
No, there's nothing else to add.
Are there any questions on this paper?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just having a look at this, and sort of some things just sort of leapt out at me. It's 3.2. Which is, however, in reality, where the budget gap cannot be fully closed through the above, the likely solution will be reductions to or full cessation of service provision. Could we have an idea of what that might mean? And also, sorry, I might just not be very up to speed about this, but the increase of 2% adult social care precept, has the government okayed that to go ahead? I might have missed that, sorry.
Yeah. I'll deal with the latter point first of all. The actual local government finance settlement, the draft local government finance settlement, is due out this Thursday. We had the autumn statement a couple of weeks ago, but it was very broad headlines. We'll know, and that is quite crucial because it says how much revenue support grant we're going to get, where we are with the new homes bonus. What we're expecting up until a few days ago was that it will be a 2% adult social care precept, and then 1.99% will be the maximum council tax increase without triggering off a referendum. Now there is sort of various speculation now that the adult social care precept might potentially even be slightly higher, because I think everyone recognises that adult social care is in a very difficult financial position with the state of domiciliary care, the increase in the national living wage, residential care providers pulling out of the market. So there is again speculation that might even potentially be higher on Thursday when the announcement comes out. But to say at the moment we're anticipating at least 2%, and there's obviously members will need to confirm this in February when it goes to full council. But what officers will be recommending is that we go for the full 2% for adult social care and the full 1.9% on the general council tax.
And the cessation of services.
Sorry, at this moment in time, there are I think there were, I hesitate to say none because of all the discussion that took place at the last council meeting. But the proposals that are coming forward, if there are no formal proposals to actually fully close any services.
Okay, but could you give us an idea of the ones that sort of might be the ones that I suppose what I'm kind of asking is which ones are statutory and which ones aren't, I guess is what I'm asking. If it would be the non-statutory ones that would be at risk. I understand you're not saying you will be doing any of these things.
I mean, it's again a difficult one to answer that because take adult social care. That technically, there's none of the services are statutory. It's the duty to provide care that is statutory, and what we're having to look at is whether we can get better value for money from some of the services we're delivering at the moment. So domiciliary care, we're looking at quite a different model of services, more around geographical zoned areas, about sort of setting up community enterprises, looking at micro businesses. We're having to look at quite a different radical offer, so that the service won't be closing, but it will be different in a different way. So the Meals on Wheels service again will be delivered in a different way. We're looking at the whole sort of digital offer in terms of how people contact the council. Again, there's likely to be in terms of like the contact centre, and again how people contact us through the hub. So again, I can't say that there's going to be no reduction in services, but there'll be no services that are going to be fully closing.
I mean, whilst it doesn't touch housing, the only ones that spring to mind in my experience are non-statutory services are certainly libraries, and leisure is a non-statutory duty. So, and I know there's a library review which is being undertaken and be reported back to the Cabinet in March, which will be interesting. But where we are, we're just asked to note this at this time because obviously we haven't got the full figures. I'm sure they'll come along to us in February. And then we go on to the work programme. There are some items there that we don't need in February, won't the pay to stay update, we won't need that. Disposal of the higher value asset report.
What we are expecting is that there will be a housing white paper,
yes,
which is due out next month,
January.
So that might encompass quite a number of these items, particularly high value assets, obviously what might replace pay to stay, fixed term tenancies. So it might well be that we'll incorporate a number of items in that the housing white paper response.
With that, yes.
So can I just double check, Roger, that will the homelessness service review include that We weren't calling it an inquiry or an investigation. We were calling it. Can't remember what the exact turn of eloquent phrase that you came up with, but the one about the Gazette report about the gatekeeping and the how to sleep on a park bench leaflet.
I can give you absolute assurance we do not give out any such leaflet whatsoever, so I don't need to review that because that is not a policy and with no idea where that came from. That will be part of the review. I know there's lots of concerns about the how people have to access online, what's called the HED, the HED, I can't remember what that stands for, the acronym, about Housing Employment Directive, and it's not naturally trip off the tongue. We are facing increasing challenges in terms of the numbers of homelessness applications are growing, about where in terms of sourcing temporary accommodation, we're restructuring the team and having a specific homelessness manager in there. Yeah, so there'll be a number of things that we'll bring back about as part of that review.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we note the programme and the meeting is closed.